Welcome to First Class Counselors, where we give camp counselors insider tips and advice on how to make a camper's summer the best it can be.
I mean, hey, you've only got a few days of staff training in the summer. So think of this as your year-round endurance training for the marathon that is the summer to come. My name is Matt Wilfred, and I'm the executive producer of podcasting at Go Camp Pro, and I'm so glad that you are here listening to this episode.
And my name is Oliver Gregan. I'm the executive director at YMCA Camp Winona. My pronouns are he, him, and I am excited about today's topic because today we are talking about ages and stages. In fact, this is a two-part series for us because many camps are working with campers from as young as 4 all the way up to 18. It's a big gap in development for emotional, physical, and mental development. There is one thing that you can be certain about, and that is the way you take care of a 4-year-old is not the same way you're going to take care of a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old. This two-part series is splitting it up. We're going to call it littles and bigs. And what are some things that you need to know as a counselor to focus on? And for clarity, for this two-part series, we're just covering the first batch, the littles right here. And in the next part 2, we're going to cover the bigs. But in part 2, we're only going to cover that 11 to 14 range. We're going to save those 15 to 16 and 17-year-olds for maybe part 3 one day. But to start us off, Matt, do you want to let us know some of the things we need to know about ages and stages before we really dive in?
For sure. I mean, so this episode, we're talking about 4 to 11-ish, right? And especially for 4 to 11, kids are so unique and we forget what it's like to be a 4 and 11-year-old. So that's why we wanted to start with this one. Now, what I would say is that, a lot of camps are going to do this ages and stages as part of staff training. It's really kind of prerequisite learning. But if you want to be a first class counselor and be a keener, as we say on this show sometimes, I would encourage you to check out the famous stages of development from famous psychologists. So you have, Piaget, Erikson, Vygotsky. There's tons of different people that have many different theories, and some of them are different in terms of what they believe, what age, what falls at what age, but some of them cover very different parts of social, emotional, physical, mental. They cover a bunch of different things, and that's not what we're going to go through on this podcast, because we'll put some links in the show notes and you can read that yourselves. What Oliver and I are going to focus on for this episode is how to contextualize all of that into the summer camp experience. So what do you as a camp counselor need to know when it comes to working with, in this episode, 4 to 11-year-olds?
Yeah, and I think the cool thing is, for many of you who may be in childcare or taking care of kids, you may have heard some of those famous psychologist names when you're going through school. So please don't leave yourself out from doing a quick Google search, finding some information about them, and trying to do some of your own detective work and contextualize it in your own mind as well. And you'll be able to see that out on the campgrounds a lot easier if you have a better understanding of those theorists and what their theories are. But for us, breaking it down today, we're going to say what we call the triangle of care. And it's something we've definitely talked about in the show. It's something that I teach to all my staff about them getting a better understanding. So when they're looking at a situation, they can evaluate, figure out, and kind of grade where they're supposed to be falling in this pyramid. So the first one I always talk about is emotionally. This is covering social situations, personal thoughts like self-esteem, that feeling of missing home sometimes. It's feelings, and that's really what we're talking about when it comes to emotion, right? And we'll get down to mentally next, which is, what do campers understand? The complexity of language that you're using, the complexity of the rules that might be in a game, how long their attention span may last, appropriate content and discussion when you are just speaking or acting around them, right? Like the jokes that you do in a skit are going to be very different for an 8-year-old than they are going to be for a 15-year-old. So where are they at mentally in their development? And then finally, physically, right? What kind of activities can they handle, right? We're talking about our gross motor skills, the big things like throwing and catching, but also some of those minor skills, right? The fine motor skills, like being able to write something out on paper, or, even like breaking a twig like into little tiny pieces, right? Or like peeling something, like peeling an orange. Those things our fine motor skills. And you may need to help a younger camper with those. And then some other things that they need to remember too, like their self-care, showering, the bathroom, the changing of clothes, the unspoken conditions that they might not be able to voice, right? I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm sleepy. So physical is a huge one. And the thing is, a lot of people always say that there's these 3 topics, and some people add some other ones and put some different levels to it. But I like the idea of this triangle where they're all technically connected, right? Someone's physical health and their physical needs are connected to their emotional, and still connected to their mental, and mental is connected to physical, right? Like everything comes together into this triangle of where we're trying to give care. So that's really where we're going to focus as we go through. We're going to break it down into those 3 groups and then see how well we can hopefully contextualize it to you, our listeners, how you can see and grade it when you're out at camp as well. Matt, what do you want to add into that?
I think for me, I think that's a really great breakdown. And I love that triangle of care metaphor, because different pieces of the triangle connect with each other. It's almost like a 3-circle Venn diagram as well, right? There's going to be overlap in the different sections as well. We're, like I said at the start, we're going to try and contextualize that and give you some of our best tips and practices. When I think about this age generally, I always get a big smile on my face, because this is the age of camper where it's all about enthusiasm, camp magic, and buy-in. These kids love being at camp. They love just like going for a run. They love when people get into character and create a world for them to live in. All of those kinds of things work really well with them. And you don't, even up to 11, when you're up to 11, it can start coming on this, but you have just that loving desire to be at camp, and they're not as socially awkward as when puberty starts rearing its ugly head. So you get a lot of great things because of it. And the cool thing about this age is that it's where we can be really proactive with their social emotional learning. So we have lots of opportunities to teach them social and emotionally positive behaviors and cues without them necessarily understanding empathy or logic or reasoning yet. They're developing those skills, and they'll really develop them when they're a little bit older. But if we can teach them cues like holding the door for somebody or asking about how someone's day was, they just do it because it's the thing that the adult in their life told them to do. And then when they get older, they'll start to understand, oh yeah, when I hold the door, it really serves my community. Or when I ask them about someone about their day, that shows that I'm caring about them. So a lot of the tips that we're going to give here are kind of the proactive tips that we can help raise amazing young kids, so that when they're older, we have to do a lot less reactive behavior management. So this really sets the stage for success in the future.
Yeah, and you're going to connect right into a point that I want to make when we go into our first category here with emotional boundaries of this kind of prepubescent kid, right? They're learning about other people's feelings, that empathy that you were just talking about, Matt. Like they don't fully gather it. They know how they feel, but their actions aren't always for others, right? They're definitely thinking about themselves first. But it is really cool because you as a mentor of them, if you're teaching them these things, you start to see that as you coach them through the synapses in that brain of understanding, oh, somebody else's feelings were affected by this. It's really beautiful because it's really obvious in younger kids, right? Once they get that realization, and they may forget it 5 minutes later, right? That synapse that you created is not a permanent one. It's not going to be there forever and ever once you do it once, but you're building on it. You're training that little electrical signal in their brain to go off to think about other people when you build in those routines, like keeping the door open for somebody else. And to go into that, to build those, I like to talk about this core idea of giving kids tools to communicate their feelings, right? I like to think of that octopus, like that little stuffed octopus that has an angry face, and if you fold it in on itself, it becomes like a happy face. Yeah. And you can like put it on your desk or like where people can see it, so they know like if you're happy or sad. That's a clear visual thing that little kids can see, and they can go, okay, cool, I can tell that's where I'm supposed to be emotionally in this area. And there's a lot of ways you can do that around camp. I've seen camps that have done things like putting a stoplight on the bunk, so like a green light means come on over and hang out with me in my bunk. A yellow means like ask me permission first. I'm kind of like in quiet mode, but like I'll also talk to you. And red means like I need my personal space. And those are clear, decisive things for kids to use to kind of start to figure out what their emotion is. And they can understand like what emotion is proper in which situations. And another thing I think is really important for you as a counselor, especially little kids, you can start to develop a secret language to them, something that you and they can communicate properly with each other, or when you're moving amongst camp, to be like, hey, are you upset right now? And this is a great way to like maybe introduce American Sign into your camp, where you and a camper might be able to sign something to each other to let them know like, hey, I'm not feeling great today. Can you help me out? And finally, the last tool I really like to do with younger kids is writing or drawing. Some of them might be still learning their letters, or they might still be learning like how to write full sentence and stuff. You get in that really young category, but they can still draw pictures. And it's not about how well they write something or how good the picture is. It's about them being able to take that 5 to 10 minutes to display how they're feeling onto a piece of paper, right? To fully contextualize what's going on in their head, to help build on that emotional strength and ability. So if you are doing that with that kid, give them those 5 to 10 minutes to really think about what they're drawing and to describe their day. And that way they can then be able to communicate their feelings too. So that's my big one with emotional boundaries, is really the ability to communicate it.
I think that's super smart, Oliver. I like this because when kids have big emotions or even small emotions, sometimes they're not exactly logical, right? As we as older people would deem quote unquote logical, but they're still feeling those things, and those feelings are extremely valid. Doesn't necessarily matter the reason that they're having a meltdown in that moment. If it's gotten that far, it's that they're having it. So I think I like, Oliver, that it sounds like you have like tasked our listeners to be emotional translators this summer with those wee ones. I want to share a couple tips here when it comes to big emotions, because we know that it's going to happen, right? We know that eventually kids get pushed past their boundaries, and we got to know how to deal with that. And the first way is for sure understanding early warning signs, so we can again be proactive and not reactive. So we should know with campers what it looks like when they're overtired, or we should know what it looks like when their needs aren't met in some way, when they're feeling maybe left out. We did a great episode called Super Supervision, I believe it's called. I'll link to it in the show notes. That is all about looking for those early warning signs. We talked about the Darling framework, right? When all of those things are happening, this is what we need to watch out for. So I'll make sure I link that in the show notes. So being proactive is definitely important. But if it does get to the point where they're in those big emotional times, it's really important to remember that learning with this age, learning doesn't happen in those big emotions, right? You cannot get someone to learn, a young one to learn when they're melting down. It's not a teachable moment. It's a moment for you to help them translate their feelings so you can start to get to it, because then when they're calmed down, then that's where you can start to kind of understand and help them understand. But you bringing out like the frowny smiley octopus while they're having a meltdown, don't even bother. Not worth it. My go-to strategy is giving them space and letting them have those emotions. And so two things. One, at the start of the week, if you know that the campers might have that tendency, you can establish a spot at camp where they go to. And maybe your whole camp kind of has a go-to spot or a couple of spots where they know that if a camper's sitting by themselves in that spot, don't go to them. Let them handle what they're doing, and then that counselor will approach them. The other thing that at Pierce Williams, when I worked there, they had this sign. I can't remember which. They had a bunch of hand signals for the counseling staff, but one of them, I think it was like hands behind their head or something like that, was just the way to communicate, I've got this. Totally fine. The kid's melting down. It's fine. They will be okay eventually, as long as they're not hurting themselves or others. Let them do what they need to do so you can get to the good emotions. The other thing is that we've talked a lot about missing home on this podcast, because we know that that's going to happen. But when it comes to an emotional reaction, sometimes they are going through emotions for the first time, right? They might not have ever been away from home for this long, or felt that sense of love translating into longing, translating into, missing and being upset. So this is my favorite age when it comes to emotional stuff, is just to go through your strategy book until you find something that works, right? You don't necessarily have to have a logical connection to find a solution with them. So when it comes to mitigating that, again, we're not talking to them when they're yelling and screaming and saying, I want to go home, I want to go home. Once you get them to be a little quiet, they can still be teary and stuff. But this is your chance to kind of go through a bunch of different strategies and find what works best for that camper. I think that's definitely for all ages, but it definitely rings true for this age group.
Yeah, I think you hit something really well there, Matt, where when that camper is just too much energy, right? Emotion exhibits energy, right? It is a fire that has to burn out, whether it is sadness or anger or even excitement, right? Like
Yep.
someone's really happy and enjoying themselves, they want to ride that moment for as long as they can before they're tired or that luster for the moment is gone. So I think that's a great point, is like, yeah, don't bring out an octopus or don't ruin the high moment because you're trying to get control over the situation. You got to sometimes let those moments occur. I can really remember this camper once upon a time that I had who was super, super angry. And in order to mitigate his anger, right, we said, all right, what can we control in the situation? And that's, hey, he's willing to move to another area, right? So we got him to move to another area. He was still angry and still mad, and he wanted to throw things and punch things and break things. And I was like, hey, how about this? We jump as hard as we can in the air and we stomp down on the ground, up and down, stomp, 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 like a big giant. And within a minute of doing that, maybe even 30 seconds, he just expended the energy he had in him that was directed towards anger into the stomping on the ground. And do we always want somebody to expend their anger into like a violent stomping on the ground? No, but we have an 8-year-old kid who could control themselves to direct it in one direction in a non-destructive manner with supervision around, and all these other factors made it possible for that kid to calm down in a relatively short amount of time in a controlled manner. And like after that 30 seconds of stomping, he like had this big smile on his face, and he was like, man, that really worked for me for a little second there. And that was really cool. One thing that I did leave out for about communicating, and it's just because some of our kids are younger now, and sometimes writing is a little bit tougher. I do know of a first grade classroom that was doing like the office interviews, and they would like had a little like cubby in their classroom, and the kids would go into the cubby, and they had like this old like, I'm calling it old, but it was probably like a 2010 camera that they would just turn on, and they would like turn the camera on when they went, and they would just talk about what was making them upset in the class or what was going on in the classroom. And then they would turn it off and they would go back to class. And then the teacher, like it was left there. It's not like the teacher ever did anything with the video other than go and watch it themselves. And they talked about all the funny stories that kids would tell going into the little office booth. And it was a little first grade class. So maybe it's something that you could do in your cabin or something. Or maybe they just do it with a mirror, right? To make it a little bit easier. All right. We're going to hop on down to our next part of our triangle. And that's physicalness. That whole physically caring for our younger campers. And it's really important here. Like we're talking about still a pretty big age gap. That like 4 to 11 or 5 and 10, like there's a lot that happens in that time period, right? There's like an initial like growth spurt that happens right around that like 5 and 6, and then they kind of stay the same for like 8, 9, and 10, and then all of a sudden they're going to start to hit that early onset of puberty, and they're going to start growing and changing a little bit. But there's also just a big difference in where their like gross and fine motor skills are at this point. So you really got to think about like what your games and what your activities are going to be with them when moving around, right? So like some gross motor skills are like you're working on throwing, catching, and basic kicking. Sometimes like even an 11 or 12-year-old has trouble shooting a basketball into a hoop. They just don't have the upper body strength yet. So you might want to go to the shorter hoop to play those games. Even kicking a soccer ball in the right direction or with enough force that it can actually travel across the field. These are all things that they're still building up on strength. The other one I bring up is with like archery. If you're going to archery or something like that, pulling back that bowstring, it might cause a little bit more physical challenge. And that's a big deal because there's a big difference sometimes even between like a 4th grader and a 6th grader, which is 8 and 11, and where their physical development is. And that's important to think about, where they're going to be physically capable of completing some of the tasks or activities that you might be having them do on camp. And that's just talking about their physical capabilities and motor skills. Matt, what are some things physically you think about when it comes to younger campers?
Well, building on what you were just saying there, I think that you're right. It varies so much. And kind of the so what of that for me as camp counselors is that we need to plan for that when we're planning activities and programs. You need to take extra time to go back to the fundamentals of pulling a bowstring or shooting a ball or those kinds of things. And just because you have a group of 10-year-olds, there might be one kid in there that when you say, okay, we're just gonna go play a game, right? We're just go, let's play pickup basketball. Whereas if you spent that 5 minutes of like, okay, let's review some proper shooting techniques, some of these physical skills, you're going to help at least one camper for sure feel much more included. So just remember that it takes them longer to learn these things, and try not to assume, because assuming can leave kids out, and that's obviously not what we want. When it comes to physical things to be aware of for me is there's two. One is that they tire so easily, which is great, especially when it comes to bedtime. If you run them again with that enthusiasm, they'll go to bed. But with all of these physical things, they don't have the ability to regulate those physical things nearly as well as a 12 to 15-year-old or 12 or older kid will. And that means that you want, again, to be proactive about the situation. I have one of my favorite camp moments was when I was a Pee-wee counselor, and Pee-wees are 6 or 7 years old. And I was sitting across the table from my camper, and I was just watching him slowly fall asleep at the dinner table. Sleep, 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 boom, head into a bowl of spaghetti, and then woke himself up with spaghetti all over his face. And he was a good sport about it, but he was so tired, and it was adorable. And he had spaghetti all over his face. So after we cleaned him up, my head counselor actually came over to me. This is when I was a counselor, and said, I noticed that he's really tired. Has he been getting rest during the day? And I thought to myself, I went, oh man, we kind of missed rest hour because I had this really cool, fun thing planned and they were all into it. And the head counselor said, that's awesome that you did that. Just remember that there's still more fun after dinner that we want them to be a part of without falling asleep. And I went, oh, of course, that makes sense. And this is everything. This is going to the bathroom. This is getting enough water. All of those things, at the end of the day, they're at the age where we have to manage those things a little bit more, and they can't regulate it. So, with the older ones, I'm a huge fan of natural consequences. Like if a kid runs himself, tires himself out, gets a little bit sunburnt, those kinds of things, there's teachable moments in that. I'm not going to let a kid get seriously hurt or seriously sunburnt or any of those things, but it's not kind to do that with a younger kid, because they just don't have, not only do they not have the regulation, they don't have the future planning ability as much to be like, oh, if I don't drink water, I'm going to be super dehydrated and cranky. Or if I run around all day and don't rest, I'm going to be super tired. They don't think about those things. They just say, I want to run because it's fun, period, full stop. I'm going to go run. Right. So the kind and compassionate thing is to look over their needs, but you can also still build teachable moments in that as well. When you are walking from place to place, always make sure their water bottle is full. Everybody goes to the bathroom when we're transitioning from point to point, and we can teach them in those moments and say, hey, we haven't been in a little bit, so let's all go to the bathroom and try, even if we don't think we have to. Or everyone's going to fill their water bottles because that's what we do. And kids are, because this age is such a, along for the ride, if you will, stage, they're just going to do it. And again, we're teaching them great lessons that will help them as they get older.
Yeah, I think you hit a huge point there too, where taking care of their basic needs is a huge part of your job, like for their physical needs, right?
Yeah.
You brought up sunburn. You talked about like making sure they have enough food and water. A big thing for me is making sure they're changing their clothes, right? Like
yes.
you can have a 9-year-old who loves their like red Captain America shirt, and they will wear it every day if you don't get them to actually. It wasn't Captain America. We had a kid this summer who did not want to take off his shark shirt. He had a shark shirt on every single day, never wanted to take it off. So we eventually went to like Lost and Found. We found another shirt that had a shark on it. And we were like, hey, look, we got a backup shark shirt for you. Got him to switch in the shirts, literally brought his other shirt that he had worn for 2 days and we couldn't get it off of him to the laundry, washed the shirt, brought it back to him the next day, and we're like, here you go, buddy. You can go right back into that shark shirt. And then when mom came, she was like, I only saw him in shark shirt photos. Why did he never switch his shirt? And we explained, like, hey, look, we washed that shirt 3 times in the week that he was here, just to make, and we found another shark shirt that he like wore while we were washing it. We did everything we could. And she was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. So making sure you're taking care of those physical needs is huge, you guys. And I think that regulation, Matt, you talked about is so important as well. And you're going to see that the physical needs of your campers are going to dramatically change when we talk about the older campers in part 2. So don't miss out on that. It's going to be a great episode. But moving into the rest of our triangle of care here, we're going to talk about mentally caring for these younger campers. And a lot of people sometimes get these confused. What is the difference between mental and emotional care? Mental is their cognitive ability. It's their logic. It's their solving of problems. It's their understanding of bigger concepts in our world. That's the difference between that and emotional, where emotional is, how am I socially getting along with other people? How do I feel with my personal self-esteem? How did the situation affect me? So there's that difference there that we want to talk about. And with younger kids, obviously, they are not as experienced. They have not had as much schooling. They have not seen how big and grand the world is. And even some simple things that you can have a lot of fun with are like, get 2 different sized cups and put the same amount of water in them and ask them like which one has more water. And you will find out that a 6 to 8-year-old can't figure it out. Like that law of like conservation of property or mass, or I'm forgetting my science now because I'm live and talking on a podcast. Please don't insult my science knowledge because I'm usually pretty good at it. But that like little concept blows their minds and it's so much fun. And you can do that with kids this age because it's like magic. Science is still like magic to them. So enjoy that moment. But it's also really important that you as a counselor are thinking about this when you're working with them. Are your rules to the point? Are they simple to understand? Now, granted, you want to do that with everything, but when you're working with younger kids, it's so, so important. Try to keep things within like 5 basic rules that they can understand, and they repeat them back to you. Have them say like, what's rule number 1? What's rule number 2? What's rule number 3, right? If they know the rules well enough that they can repeat them back to you, then your game that you were playing is simple enough. And let me tell you, there's plenty of games that are so simple. I once played a game of clap catch with kids for like an hour, and here are the rules. Get ready for it. Someone throws the ball to you, you clap your hands and then catch the ball. That's the game. There's nothing more to it. They get to then throw the ball to somebody else. They clap their hands and catch. You can put some changes in there where like you get to stand in the middle and then you try to throw the ball to them like at a quicker pace or behind your back and they got it right. But at the end of the day, clap your hands, catch the ball. Those are the rules. And it's such a simple thing, and you can do it with those younger kids. It's really practicing on that physical gross motor skills we were talking about with throwing and catching, the reactionary skills. It's a great game. There, you just got a game to play with kids. But going back to it, right? Those rules are short and simple, and it's not complicated. And then the other thing I like to talk about here is your topic of conversation, to say the least. What is the coverage of what you're talking about? And I like to say, keep it PG. Think about Disney, right? You're not going to talk about things that are inappropriate or past what their age limit is. They might bring them up. They might have caught something on the internet. Mom or dad might, let things slip at home. This is like swearing, inappropriate language, inappropriate topics. Really keep it within what their age group really should be paying attention to by what general culture is. And this is really tough as a counselor, right? Because you might be 8, 16, 17, 18, 19, and this is kind of part of the co-parenting as a counselor you have to do, where you have kids who are coming from all different walks of life. We're coming in with all different experiences mentally of what they've covered. And now you are going to have all of them in a cabin, and you got to make sure you can mitigate that conversation to where it's appropriate for every single kid in that cabin at an appropriate level. So you have to be ready to say, hey, that's not something we're going to talk about tonight. Maybe that's a conversation we can have another time. If this is something that you really want to talk about, let's talk about it after with just, you, me, and another counselor, right? Those types of lines are totally acceptable to say, so you can keep the level of conversation appropriate for the kids that are in the cabin. And I think that's really important. And then I have the point already, but science programming, it's like magic to them. You can do tricks and stuff and they'll never understand what's going on, but it's really cool and they enjoy it.
Awesome. I think that one of the coolest things about this age group, mentally wise, is that they are looking for role models. They are actively looking, but not in a way of saying like, I want to be like you when I'm older. Cause we know that the future planning isn't exactly there, but they just want to be, they're going to take your example with everything. So you've heard me talk about IAAT, or I am always teaching, that little acronym, which is Travis Allison's unified theory of summer camp. And that basically is just that in everything we do, we are teaching them how to be, and mentally too. This is it, right? So just be aware that when you are doing things, you are setting the example and teaching them without actually saying that I'm teaching them. It's how you interact with others. It's how you interact with them. It's how you play games, all of those things. So the one thing that we haven't quite talked about yet, but I think definitely does fall under the mental category, is social development, right? At this age, this is where they're starting to make friends. They're starting to develop those connections, empathy, all of those things. But again, this is where we have the ability to expose them to friend-making behaviors. And the way that we can do that as camp counselors is that we mix up the partners. We mix up the seating, where they're sitting at every meal in the dining hall. Maybe even mixing up their bunks, if that's something that you can do, maybe like a changing spaces kind of idea. Or, if you're walking from place to place, you can say, okay, you're going to walk with a buddy, and I want you to link arms and try to only walk with 3 feet. See what happens. See how you can do that. Just give them little challenges where they can have experiences. My go-to way to help kids make friends is to play a game with them and invite somebody else into that game. So maybe you're playing Gaga Ball, maybe you're playing Oliver's amazing game of Throw Clap, and you invite another kid in to play that, so that you don't like, they don't have to go out and invite that person. You could say, hey, it looks like that person wants to play. Would you like to go invite them? But even easier is you calling that other camper in to say, hey, let's play this game together. And then you have the ability to help them forge their own connection, because the kids aren't thinking terribly deeply about those connections. But if they are having a positive experience like play with one another, they start to build those connections on their own. So be aware of, the idea. We talk about cliques and, exclusion a lot. We'll definitely cover that in our next episode. But if we teach kids to recognize that it's fun to play with new people and it's fun to try new things, that's where we get them. And that's where we start to, again, set ourselves up for success in the future.
Yeah. And I think rounding it off at the end of the day, like if you can think about the development of your kids while you're with them, right? Where they are on these ages and stages, you can think about how you're going to adapt activities for them, situations in your dining hall, or when you're in like a gathering, or just chilling in the cabin, right? All those areas. These are helpful tools that you can use, or at least have in the back of your brain to think, okay, how do I want to come about this situation? Or even on a frustrating day when you're just tired and you're like, man, I don't understand why this doesn't happen. You can think to yourself, oh, wait, I have to remember my kids are developing. They're still learning and growing. And that's a huge part of this, is where are they at mentally, where are they at physically, and where are they at emotionally, so that I can take care of them in the best way possible. And with that being said, we always end our day with a little bit of an ever-growing and ever-learning, also known as an Eggle. So Matt, do you want to kick us off? What do you want your Eggle to be? And I'm kind of laughing at what I can see in the show notes.
Yeah, Oliver, you might know this as a different name, but it's Oliver's favorite Eggle, which is a camp song. So I have a song for you for today's Eggle, and it's inspired by my nephew. I went over to see him the other day, and he's at, like, I think he is 5 now, and he's at the perfect age. He's like, I can't wait for him to go to camp because he's exactly who I'm talking about when it comes to that, like, energy and just being excited for life. He is that kid. So I taught him this song, and he nearly pooped his pants because he thought it was so funny. So the song is called Ontario Milk, but obviously you can change it to whatever state you're in, or if you want to use Ontario Milk and say that my best friend Matt from this podcast that I listened to taught me this song, so I want to keep it Ontario Milk, whatever you want to say. And the song goes like this. So with your body, we're spelling milk essentially. So I would teach the chorus of the song, and it goes like this: don't give me no pop, no pop. Don't give me no tea, no tea. Ontario milk, moo, 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 moo. Ontario milk, moo, 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 moo. But when you say Ontario milk, you're going to turn your hands. I guess if you know, like if you're cracking your knuckles, if for those of you listening who can't see right now, you might want to watch on YouTube. If you crack your knuckles but leave your thumbs hanging down, your thumbs become the udders of the cow. And so this is done with a partner, and you go Ontario milk, and then one person grabs your thumbs and goes moo, 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 and then the other person switches. You go Ontario milk, moo, 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 and you let the other person milk your thumbs. So that's the chorus. Okay. The verse goes, give me a long M. And then everyone goes, M, a long M, right? And you can make it with your body. And then you go, give me a short M. And then you make with your fingers, you can make a little M, and you go M. Then you go do the chorus. Don't give me no pop, no pop. Don't give me no tea, no tea. Ontario milk, moo, 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 moo. Ontario milk, moo, 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 moo. Then you go, give me a long I, give me a short I, give me a, then you know, do the chorus. Long L with your whole body, short L with your fingers, L. Don't give me a pop, no pop. Then you with K, and then you go, give me a long milk, and you say chocolate. And you go, give me a short milk, and you say skim. Then you go, give me no pop, no pop. Give me a tea, no tea. Then we invented another verse. It was, give me an even longer milk, and you go homogenized, and you go, give me an even shorter milk, and you go soy. Don't give me no pop, no pop. Give me no tea, no tea. Ontario milk, moo, 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 moo. Ontario milk, moo, 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 moo. That is Ontario milk. One of my absolute favorites, and it's a great song for kids because it just repeats. It's not a repeat after me song, but it repeats over and over, and they will love milking each other's thumbs. And the even better part is watching teenagers do it because they're so awkward about it. But it's some good old fashioned campy fun.
Oh yeah, I've definitely heard that one before. Not Ontario milk. And I do have a question for our listeners who may be wondering. Ontario milk is in a bag. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Is bagged milk.
It can be in a bag. Yeah, you can buy it in a carton. But you know, growing up, we had it in bags. You get a bag with three like 1 gallon, not gallon. I can't remember how much, a quart, 3 quarts of milk, and a quart is in a bag, and you put it in this little holder and you cut the end off, and that's how you drink your milk. Canadian thing.
Canadian milk. My tip is just because we're talking about milk real quick. I know I already did throw clap, but milk, for those of you who may not like drink a lot of milk regularly, or like you might be buying milk occasionally and then it goes bad really, and you're like, oh man, I barely used all of my milk. I switched over to oat milk like maybe 6 months ago because I was trying to put less dairy in my diet. And let me tell you, oat milk lasts longer. It tastes really good. You don't really notice the difference too much unless you're like really picky about your milk. And for me, a single guy who lives alone, who like uses milk occasionally for tea in the morning, the long-lasting oat is a huge helpful tip for all of you out there. That's not too much of an echo for everybody, but hey,
I
look,
like it.
It works for me. Yeah.
And Oliver, oat milk is the perfect milk to take on a canoe trip with you. We took little like this summer when we went on a canoe trip, we took little like Tetra packs of oat milk, and they're sealed, but they can get warm and be in your food barrel till the last day. And we had milk with our coffee on trip. It was and it really tasty. It's got that extra little bit of little zhuzh to it, if you will.
Yeah, a word we're starting to use a lot more often on the show. Yeah, it's a little sweet, I think is the best way to put it, right?
Yeah.
But there you go. So you learned throw clap, which is technically what my Eggle is supposed to be, but also you're getting a little bit of tip about the different uses oat milk for those of you who are trippers or just occasional milk drinkers. You need a longer lasting storage of milk. But if you enjoyed today's show, and you would be so grateful if you left us a review wherever you were listening to this podcast. Your ratings and reviews not only tell us what you like or don't like about the show, but it helps boost our rankings and helps more people discover the show.
And please make sure that you check out the show notes. We did talk about some links in this episode to past ones and the stages of development articles. We'll have all of those for you. You can find them at gocamp.pro/FCC. You can find out how to get in touch with Oliver and I on there. And there's lots of other great stuff that you can find from our past shows and the other Go Camp Pro podcasts.
And with that being said, thanks for listening, friends. And remember, camp is camp and camp's all good.